Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? If you cannot, put something in the chat. First of all, happy Halloween. I hope everybody's having a great day, not too much Halloween candy being ingested. And thank you guys again for taking a little bit of time out of your day to join for our fourth case practice session. For today, we're going to do some additional problems that relate to case structuring. And I'm looking forward to this. I think it'll reinforce one of the prior sessions that we had. And also, I just want to share with you guys how important this part of a case interview is. I was just speaking to a student that I've gotten to know throughout the summer and fall that just went through full-time interviews. And when they received the call for their job offer, one of the things that person relayed, because this person calling had been one of the interviewers, he said that this person had done one of the best jobs of any candidate of structuring their case. And what made it so stand out was that it was just very organic and very unique and really tailored to the case and didn't fit some kind of cookie cutter approach. And knowing this person as I have, um, I know that they had worked very hard around just trying to structure cases like you would actually work on a business problem, whether it's inside an organization or in a client setting if you're in a consulting role. So I appreciated getting that input because I think it just validates how in this interview process, when you're approaching case interviews, the more that you can think about how you would tackle this challenge in a realistic setting, I think it's just going to really go a long way to impressing the individuals that you're interviewing with. So that's my opening kind of motivational pitch. All right, let's just real quickly before we get started with some of the problems, I wanted to just make you guys aware that after this session, we were probably going to be sending out a survey, very short. The idea is just to get a little bit of input. We're about halfway through these webinars. It will probably have some questions like I'm showing you on the screen here. What are the things you're taking away? Are there questions that are coming about? Is this a good process? There might be a couple of other things. The survey, the intention is for me to get direct feedback from you guys that this process is impactful in some way, it's useful, the format of it is beneficial, et cetera, et cetera. So just be aware that probably over the next couple of days, you'll likely see that survey, and it'll be something short. So your input and attention is appreciated. All right, let's move then to the work that we're going to do. So we've done some of the structuring in the past. It's not going to be anything different. What, again, I want to make sure that you're doing is, really listening to the case prompt. For this session, I'm not going to have you guys ask clarifying questions, but for some of the following webinars, these last four, I'm going to find a way to get that interaction. But normally in a case interview, you would ask some questions. Also, if you were doing this in the interview setting, you would be talking a little bit at the beginning of a case problem to give some of your perspectives and point of view. And then you would jump into what we're going to do today, which is the structuring, which is really prioritizing and organizing, kind of applying some hypotheses, and then, planning a little bit about how you're going to evaluate or analyze the question that's presented to you. So for these, we're going to have three problems again. I'm going to read the prompt. What I want you guys to think about as you're working towards putting the structure together is what issues are really coming to the surface for you? What are the main priorities that you would want to think about given this case? What are your hypotheses? If you want to jot down a quick set of notes for those two questions, fantastic. But our main emphasis is around structuring the problem or organizing it. All right. And then when we're done, like we have in the past, I'm going to ask a couple of people to share. We've already got some great volunteers from the OTM group, so thank you guys. But anyone else who wants to share some of your thoughts, please do. Starting, one of the things that's kind of tough in our webinar scenario is to get talking about some of these problems. And so the more that you're willing to do that, it's just going to help in the long run. All right, with that, let's move to our first question that we're going to work on. I will read through the prompt. I will give you guys about 4 to 5 minutes to bring your thoughts together, and then I will come back and ask somebody to kick us off and walk us through how you thought about this question. All right, so we're going to just jump in. And this is our first case situation. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit just to make it as easy as possible. All right, so this is the scenario. We are working with a new client who is an iconic fast food chain. We will call them C&M Root Beer, C&M for short. And they are known for delicious root beer and grilled all-American food. You can imagine what that might be. Like many fast food restaurants, C&M has been battling the trends related to healthy foods and a huge amount of growth in the fast casual food segment. The management team at C&M would like for your team, you, to assess the potential impact of the healthy food trends and all the kind of growth and specialization going on in the fast casual food segment. They want to know if this is something that essentially they should be thinking about related to the future of their business. Ultimately, they would be heading towards some recommended actions to stay kind of a recognizable dining choice for their customers. For our focus, what I want you to focus your structure around is this question. What do you think would be the highest priority issues or trends or considerations that C&M should focus on to define those future actions or plans? So what I want you to do in your structure is organize a way that you would evaluate a group of areas, a couple of different areas, that would then lead to a set of priority issues. All right, so it's somewhat of a brainstorming process, but not completely. It's a little bit more analysis that you would ultimately do, and what the structure would lead you to as an outcome if we were going forward is what would maybe be the 4 to 5 top priorities. All right. And if you guys are working along and you have a question, put it in the chat and I can try to address it. Otherwise, right now, I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to think through this, and then we'll come back and have our discussion. Please go ahead. Okay, everybody, let's discuss C&M root beer. And could one person share some of the thoughts that you put together so far?
I assume you want that from the OTM folks? Hey, Pam, can you hear me? No.
When we make noise,
All right. I think I hear somebody talking in the background.
Hey, Pam, can you hear me?
Yes, now I definitely do.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Okay, sorry. It was my computer is kind of finicky when it comes to its internal microphone.
I understand completely.
Yeah, so we don't want to. So in this case, since we're not running down specific things, we're just kind of recommending the way I'm structuring my notes is I kind of took it through basically series of circles,
Mm-hmm.
where I have the overall economy as the biggest circle. So looking at the overall economic trends that
Mm-hmm.
play into are people getting more disposable income, um, and kind of looking at consumer preference overall, and that kind of bleeds into looking at the industry itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I would want to look at other firms in the industry to see, you know, the overall growth of this segment. And then I would segment it out even further between what I called fast casual and fast food. I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
very key difference there in looking at what is growing faster.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of plays into kind of the company itself. So looking at 3 year trends of the company to determine A, if we have to change, and B, that opens up some possibilities of what are the major things that we could do. So when we're looking at specific considerations, if we get all the way down to the point of if we should change, then you can look at things like possible acquisition, possible changing of the menu, a lot more, options once you get there. But the way I'm structuring it in my head is basically saying, do we need to change? Yes, no. If we do need to change, here are 3 to 4 things that we need to do.
Yep, I like that. So you're hitting on essentially there's a number of different analysis or reviews that we'd want to do looking at these various trends, markets, industries, the company itself. Good.
Right. And the one thing I'd want to add is it would be really important at the start of this. I would probably state, without having a ton of information, I'd still want to state a hypothesis
Mm-hmm.
just so I could direct my thought. And then as my hypothesis is either confirmed or like refuted, then I would be able to say, now that I'm hearing this information, my thoughts have changed, and being able to kind of be able to adapt with new information.
Yep. Yep. So that's actually a really good thing that you've identified. So, in a case like this, and while I'm talking, I'd love to hear from another person with us who's got some other things that maybe they've thought about. But let me add in a couple of comments so you address this idea of a hypothesis. So, this is kind of a case where you're doing this scan, this like big diagnostic, and there's a risk that you could want to scan everything and you don't have that ability, right? If you guys were doing this for a class, you might do a comprehensive scan, but again, you'd have a week to do it, and maybe it could be a final exam or project. You'd have all this time, but in a 30-minute interview or a 15-minute interview, you wouldn't have time to do that. So your point about having some hypothesis, what it would allow you to do is prioritize the areas of the scan. And so, in looking at all these trends, you might be saying, look, there's a whole number of trends that I'd be looking at, a bunch of different areas, but probably the 3 things that I would really anchor around, because I think that they would be largely the most important considerations, would be these things. So, it kind of feels like in a case like this that a hypothesis or perspectives, however you want to define it, might not be necessary because it's this, big open-ended question, but you still want to be doing that because we're trying to show that you know how to prioritize. So that's really good thinking, every time you're approaching one of these cases.
And sorry, just to
Yeah,
follow up, I just have one quick follow up question.
yeah.
So in my mind, the hypothesis would be around what the highest priority is.
Correct.
Is that kind of how you would approach this? Or would you say, like, here's what I'm thinking could be like a couple of high priorities? Because the reason I ask is just because it seems like this all hinges on should they follow the trend or not.
Yep. I mean, I probably would lean towards something where there's 2 or 3 priorities, because the kinds of actions that they would want to take, I might not just have one. I might, have a couple. And it depends a little bit on how the question is asked. So if you literally interpret my question, I use issues, trends, considerations as plural. And so I would be asking you to give me maybe the 3 or 4 ultimately that you think are the most significant. And so if you had a hypothesis that gave a couple, whether it's 2 or 3, I think that it just would feel more natural. If that makes sense. And this is one of the, areas that there's not an absolute, but I think you have to really listen to the question. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else want to share some thoughts that you had for our question around C&M root beer? Anyone?
Hey, Pam. Chris over here in OTM Kid Room number 2.
Hi, Chris.
So kind of similar to the way Ben structured this, but slightly different. So we focused in on internal and external forces, not using the concentric circle method. But we hit a lot of the same high points. I think one of the big things that we touched on that might be slightly different is just what the overall dining experience is like for them, and then trying to hammer that down into like consumer satisfaction and stuff like that to see if there's a way that we can't enhance the current experience to be able to exploit that as a strength versus segmenting. And then we looked at just competition in the area, seeing if we had competitors within the fast food market and how they were faring. Just in general and kind of the unhealthy food market, and then looking at competitors in the healthy food segment as well, and seeing if any of them were kind of small enough for us to acquire and use as a spin-off.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I like that. You're right. So this is a slightly different way, what Chris has described. So using in general an internal external framework can help corral however you guys organize or group, and think visually, because you're typically drawing this on a page. Even in a corporate interview that's a little bit shorter, you might do some high level notes, but sort of think visually how you would put this on paper, and this idea of sort of what you mentioned. I love the phrase unhealthy food segment, which I don't know if you guys have been to Shake Shacks. They have a couple of them here in Chicago. Clearly, they are taking advantage of the unhealthy food segment, because your $20 hamburger, fries, and shake is also high in calorie. Not only high price, but high in calorie. So that's actually, though, I think a really interesting part of a case like this is when you guys hear this sort of a problem, don't automatically like orient your thinking around, oh my gosh, this is a company that needs to do something different. So in addition to your structuring, you want to sort of make sense of the business issue. And, a lot of people will react to this and say, oh my gosh, this is, so this is sort of a case modeled after A&W root beer. And, you can kind of think that they may not have the healthiest food on the menu, but there is a segment of the market that likes like really good classic stuff. They just may not be doing it well. So always be alert to that, because sometimes people will jump on a case like this or a situation, and rather than taking what the business does really well and trying to do it better, they'll say, let's throw that out and let's do something different. And that can get you into trouble, because the organization that you're talking to, that just may not be what they're looking for. So, again, a variety of ways that all of you could think about this. What I would, just encourage you to do is to think about how you're organizing. And this is really a case, again, that involves analysis or assessment. I kind of organized it into a group of, for our purposes, 3 buckets, but I've got a 4th one on here just to give you guys a little bit of a preview if you were taking this case a little bit further. But I kind of did a hybrid, I think, of what Ben and Chris have shared with us. So I've got some stuff about the market trends where I've really focused on kind of the eating side of it. I haven't necessarily looked at the macro economy, but that's just, trying to limit a little bit. I've also got a little bit around the current state, which both of you discussed that, kind of what's going on with the company right now, what's on their menu, what do people say about it, what financially, what's the position that the company's in, what is their brand and what is it known for. So that current state, kind of integrates a lot of different, marketing areas, and a little bit of a, current context of the company. And then I threw in case there's any finance folks with us, I threw in some financial analysis, because it could be that even though these healthy eating trends are coming about, C&M is doing just fine. And so you could actually look at a couple of metrics, financial metrics of the business, and figure out if the trends are impacting the company. And that might help you prioritize one direction or the other. So, those things are in there. And then the 4th category, which my question didn't necessarily prompt, although I can tell that probably you guys are thinking about this, and I think, Ben, you even mentioned it. So I have, if we were asking what should they do about this, you would have those first 3 areas that are kind of the assessment buckets. So these that I'm highlighting in the orange. And then if you were asked the question, what action should they take, you might put in this sort of future options. And that would allow you to, go from your assessment to figuring out a couple of actions for them to take going forward. And I point this out to you guys because you can get the same case situation, the same background, but the different question will guide you in a different direction in terms of your structure, right? So a lot of it's the same, but you might have different pieces depending on where that question lands. Okay? Any other comments or questions about C&M root beer? All right. If not, let's talk about our next situation. So we'll go through the same process. Let me give you guys the background, give you about 4 minutes to work on it, and then we'll talk about it. So in this situation, we are working with a large global automotive manufacturer who is based in Europe. It's a company we'll call Euro Auto. And they've gone through a period of kind of business decline a little bit. The management maybe wasn't as focused as they need to be. And as a result of that, the board of directors actually replaced the management team and has brought in a bunch of new executives. Now, with this new leadership, they would like to re-energize the firm's market position, and they particularly think they need to focus on increasing their awareness with consumers to elevate how people might consider buying Euro Auto's cars, making it a part of their set of purchase considerations. The result of this is that they would increase their overall market performance. So they would, essentially sell more vehicles, gain more market share. So for our purposes, what the client would like you to do is to identify the key areas of attention that would help them improve awareness in the minds of consumers, and where would you place your focus for EA going forward? All right, so I'm going to give you guys, again, about 4 minutes to work on that, and then we will discuss. Please go ahead. All right, everyone, let's discuss the situation with Euro Auto. Could I have one of you share some of the thoughts on the structure that you've put together?
Got it.
Who's ready to go?
Ooh, oh, hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, who is this?
Oh, this is Mimi Air speaking. I'm in the room full of OTM people.
Hi, Mimi.
We're having some technical issues with the laptop, but as long as you can hear me, I think we should be okay.
I can hear you perfectly well.
Okay, awesome. So my approach to this question was based on something I've actually been thinking about in managerial accounting, where we learned about this thing called the balanced scorecard. And so it's a way for companies to assess how well they're doing beyond just their financials. So the balanced scorecard basically tries to see how their performance is aligning with their overall mission and strategy. And so my question, or I guess an area I'd want to consider going into this, since, the prompt says after many years with low management attention, is that perhaps this company needs to revisit their mission and vision for themselves and get clear on that. And from there on, assess, how their financial performance has been and how that compares to competitors. And then move on to the customer perspective and assess how customers view them and how they're viewed in the market. And then furthermore, how their internal processes support the customer experience and how they're able to serve customers with the way they're set up. And then finally, looking at learning and growth in the company to see if maybe they just need to train their employees better and assess their relationships with dealerships.
Super intriguing.
All right. Well, that's all I had to say. I don't know how to mute myself right now since.
I got it.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay. So this is great. One comment immediately is I love that you're applying some thinking from class. That's anytime you guys can do that, at some degree, you may be able to do it with a little more a little more freedom to not be so bound by the exact categories of the balanced scorecard, but the principle of it makes a lot of sense here. And just, how you've integrated that thinking, those are the kinds of things that you guys can do that people are going to take notice. So And to be honest, even in the notes that I have, Mimi, I never thought about sort of the realignment of their mission and their strategy, right? That's actually, a point that you've brought up. I'm excited. I love hearing about things that I had not thought about. But you said some of the things that really got me sort of around understanding that you're thinking very broadly. When you talk about the financial performance and you talk about benchmarking or comparing to competitors, that's exactly right. Because as a company, if I'm going to set my future direction, I want to know where I stand. And then also having a customer perspective. I mean, especially in the automobile market, there's a lot going on. And looking at how the firm works internally, thinking about employees and what they're doing, mentioning the dealerships. When you talk about things like that, especially the dealerships, you start showing a degree of specificity about the fact that this case is in the automotive segment. And even as a manufacturer, the dealer component is really important, and especially because the case prompt gets at how do we create awareness in the minds of the consumer. You have to extend that thinking all the way to the actual retail channel, which is the dealership. So, just even that little bit would show me a depth of thinking that would get my attention. So that's great. Anybody else want to add on to what we have discussed so far?
Hi, Pam.
Yep.
This is Kevin coming from the other OTM room again. We kind of broke it down into 3 areas. We want to look at EA's, current product mix, external economics and market conditions, and then differentiation. So as far as the product mix is concerned, is there any product we excel at? And would we like to market that more? And then what segment are we looking to get into with our products? As far as external economics and market conditions, we want to look at consumer trends, maybe fuel prices. Are there energy and vehicle regulations out there? And then last, for differentiation, kind of how do we sell our cars? What does the buyer experience look like? And then do we offer any other services that could be a big chunk of our company moving forward?
Nice. Okay, cool. Thank you, Kevin. So also lots of good things that you're discussing that relate specifically to an automotive company, looking at things kind of internal, external, trying to hone in on different areas of assessment, right? So everybody's got the right idea here. I think when I show you the solution, I may again have organized it a little bit differently, but that's okay. When you guys go back, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I want you to do after this discussion with this material, think about differences in organization and differences in comprehensiveness, right? So I kind of took a lot of the same things that we've already discussed. I organized around some analysis of consumer needs and, thinking about what people really care about when buying a car. I also did some benchmarking. So all those different things that you both have brought up, I would probably benchmark them to competitors. So not only financials, but, products, pricing, how we sell, warranties, all that stuff. Same kind of thing, evaluating the marketing, thinking about customers, thinking about the brand, the channels, the network. So again, we've hit on some of those things. And then I've got some macro trends in there as well. That kind of bucket of macro trends, I think both of you have hit on some things that, again, as an interviewer, I would be looking for a couple of things that are really distinctive in how you've thought about this case. So, trends in regulation, trends in technology. I've thrown stuff in here about ride sharing, electric cars. So, you might have something that's very contemporary, that just shows your present business knowledge, right? That you're a good business person who thinks, about kind of the core fundamental things, but then has some, pulse. Now, you don't have to be an automotive expert, unless, you're somebody who lives in a place where you've never ridden in a car. Then maybe your just general hands-on knowledge of car things will be lacking. And if you're that kind of a person that, I had a friend who grew up in New York City. He'd never driven a car until I think he was 25 years old. When we did some cases when we were in business school, like he had no clue about things that related to cars. It was actually quite humorous. Then I would study the auto industry as one of your kind of solo activities. So again, you guys can think about all these different issues. What I want you to do, as you guys are taking time, if you are after these webinars, take the opportunity, print out these notes, and then compare these two cases that we've just done. And if you think about it at a very high level, the C&M case and the Euro Auto case have some similarities, right? These are both companies that need kind of a scan, but they have a different kind of flavor in their question, right? One is, prioritize. This one is, to highlight, what areas they might focus on to be able to fix it. But in some ways, those questions are very similar. But there are also some differences in the way that things are structured at the detail level. But if you go up to sort of the broad organization, they have some similarities in the structures. So I suggest that kind of an activity, because one of the things that happens with people is after you do a number of cases, you kind of get like, oh, I've heard that question before, and here's my go-to structure. And it can put you into a situation where you start to get a little bit robotic, and you don't take into consideration the nuances, right? And at a minimum, if you put food-related things into the one case and car-related things into the other case, that makes you not the casing robot. It really shows that you're thinking about the problem. So that's kind of the nice thing about these case structures is you can go back after some time and sort of flip through them and see similarities and differences. All right. So that's just something I wanted to highlight in terms of your follow-up. Any questions about this problem? I think, both of you that discussed this, I really like the way you're thinking about it and organizing, and also this is a great forum for us to see how you're not going to have the same solutions, the same approaches. And actually I prefer that, because that just shows me that you actually are thinking as opposed to, again, trying to apply some recipe. But back to my original. Any questions before we move on? Okay. Let's do our last question then. Okay, so let me give you this situation and we'll work through this last problem. So we are working with an organization called Page Turner, who is a leading book publisher. They operate throughout the globe. And as part of the strategic planning team, they're constantly looking at their strategy. And this is an organization that really thinks a lot about innovation. The management team of Page Turner has identified a potential acquisition target, and they'd like to get your thoughts. They have come across this company called We Read, and it's a startup firm. And what this company does is crowdfund writer ideas. So what this means is that writers create a project with a book concept, And then the general market, any one of us can go out to the We Read website. They can review the project, and then they can donate money to help the writer fund their project. And then once the project is funded, the writers will commit to the project and write their book. Page Turner thinks that this is a really interesting idea because it minimizes the upfront investment on book ideas, which is a big deal for these publishing houses because they tend to take on a lot of risk. It also moves them into a new area of business. It takes advantage of a lot of overall market and industry trends with these crowdfunding platforms and consumers being more involved in the creative process. So I'd like you to put together the structure that Page Turner would use to evaluate the potential acquisition. And in that structure, what you would essentially do is organize around the key areas that you think would be important to investigate. Okay? So I'm going to give you guys about 4 minutes to work on that, and then we will hear from a person or two and discuss. So please go ahead. Okay, everyone, could I have someone share how you've thought about this case with us?
Hey, this is Karan. I can give it a try.
Sure, Karan, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I have three boxes. So one category is kind of trying to understand the current state of the company. So new books published per year, awards won per year because they care about innovation, financials, margin for a new book published, then customer demographic served, trying to identify core customer base. The second box or category is We Read, the new company. Trying to understand that company, maybe number of books or number of projects that are successful based on their model. Awards to number of books published ratio, again, another metric to define success rate. And what is their core customer demographic and is there any overlap? And finally, I have miscellaneous tangential areas. Are books, where are the future market trends going? Do we focus on blogs or maybe video logs, online content, move away from books? We can investigate that as well. So these are three buckets that I was thinking about. And based on that, we can go ahead with the acquisition or even think about developing a completely new product like online video content or something like that.
Very good. So you've covered a lot of good things. I mean, we've got definitely things about metrics, looking at financials, looking at customers, some overlap between these two companies. Do they fit together? You know, what are some of the market trends? I mean, those are getting at all the right areas of analysis. Cool. Anybody else want to share some of your thoughts in addition to what Karan has presented?
We got someone from the OTM room.
Fantastic. Please.
Hello, Pam. This is James.
Hi, James.
So just like in addition to what Karan said, I kind of had like 3 main buckets within like the 4 minutes we had to think about this. First was kind of like the potential marketing strategy and like how this book company plans on like integrating or using the startup to like forecast profits and all that stuff. One other bucket that kind of wasn't talked about, I was thinking about like platform investigation or how they're going to integrate this startup with their operations. Then the last bucket was just synergy, which is already talked about.
Got it. Great. Okay, fantastic, James. Yeah, so this whole idea of kind of platform, technology, integration, and like the future planning around marketing, definitely those would be things that you guys would want to address, right? And so one thing, this is an area that, if you guys are not sort of M&A experts, which who is unless you've done it, review some of the M&A materials. It doesn't hurt in case prep to just have a little bit of M&A in your back pocket because it does come up for a variety of reasons. The other thing that's kind of cool about these M&A cases is that they lend themselves to your area of specialization. So for those of you kind of, with more of an operations technology focus, that's a huge issue when it comes to M&A. For those of you on the marketing side, that's a big deal. For anybody in human capital, that's a big deal. And then finance, for sure. There's another way that I could orient this question. But these are really, good, robust kinds of cases because you start thinking about entity one, entity two, the two of them together, but then how probable is it that they could actually succeed together? And then on top of it, you're trying to, validate that this technology is even a good idea or the business model. So again, I kind of took some of this. Of course, I have more than 4 minutes to think about these things. So I organized this around a couple of specific hypotheses or criteria that would answer the question, should we acquire? And this is something that with a case like this, I would encourage you guys to do, is really think about how would you answer the yes or no? What criteria would you use to say yes, acquire or no, acquire? So, I thought about that with 4 different criteria. So one is the business could make a profit. And a lot of what Karan talked about would be the kinds of things that I would want to be evaluating. Essentially, what different kinds of metrics, what sort of success measures would those things turn into a forecast of profitability? Another thing that I think, we've talked about is the customer piece. Do customers care about this? Is this something that could go mainstream? Are there market trends that would make sense? Is there a marketing plan? And then this idea of synergies generally. Would the 2 firms be better together than each would be independently? And however you guys want to think about what those synergies would be, you could put those together. And then finally, and almost always in any type of M&A case, you really want to think about the success of the integration, the operations piece, the human capital piece, the technology piece, the marketing piece. And then, for a case like this, you've got not only the consumer, but you've also got the authors, the writers. So, bringing all that stuff together, I think between what Karan talked about and what James talked about, we've covered a lot of that ground. What I've really done is kind of built it around a set of the criteria so that at the end of each of these branches of analysis, you would have a positive or negative view of that criteria, which would then lead you to the yes, no case question. All right. Ooh, that's a lot of good stuff. Okay, guys. So nice job on this. Appreciate everybody sharing and and participating. A few thoughts, again, please go back and review some of these. So as for our next couple of webinars, we might see a few of these cases again sprinkled in as we take to some of the next steps, right? So we've done a lot of things that are the case start. For the last 4 webinars, we're going to move into some of the solving. So we'll maybe take a couple of these that we've already thought a little bit about the structure, and then how would you work your way through some type of an analysis to navigate. And so you guys have a great evening, and I'll look forward to having you join next week. And again, look for that survey. Good night, everybody.